So hi everyone, welcome to this IM hour. My name is Tuong and I do information management for International at the moment. And for this week, so we have Dan Joseph from American Red Cross. I'll let him introduce himself when he starts the session. Just some quick housekeeping before we start. So this session is recorded, as you notice. The video will be shared on YouTube. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please post them in the chat and we'll try to take them. Okay, all yours, Dan.
Thanks. Thanks for having me for this. So my name, like she said, is Dan Joseph. I'm with the American Red Cross based in Washington, D.C. My title right now is Solutions Engineer, previously GIS Officer. And so I look at different technologies and try and help us leverage them more effectively in humanitarian response. Do a lot with our response department, but also work with our preparedness and recovery teams as well. So every phase of the disaster cycle. I have been interested in drones for a couple years now, and recently worked with a research consultant to complete a study on the use of drones in the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. And more recently have been working with some colleagues in Federation on kind of reviewing aerial assessments more broadly, of which drones are kind of a small part of that potentially. And today, as part of this presentation, want to briefly go over some of the technical aspects of drones, focused mostly on kind of the mapping aspect, since that's within my expertise. Touch briefly on some of the ways that the Red Cross movement is using them, some of the general themes that came out of the previous research, and then spend some time hopefully digging into topics or questions that are of interest to the group. So this, thanks for those who've logged on to Menti and answered this first question. It looks like we have kind of a range of previous knowledge when it comes to drones, with most people rating them somewhere kind of in the middle there. And also some different answers for what people think of when they hear drone. Yeah, so quadcopters definitely, kind of DJI is one of the companies that has been in the forefront of making consumer drones, and their Mavic and other models, kind of quadcopters are front and center. Also, I saw military and surveillance and some of the less humanitarian uses that kicked off drones prior to them becoming kind of more available to consumers, and in certain areas, continued risks and awareness that we have to have when using drones when it comes to public perceptions, and how that might take place. And so we'll come back to this potentially later as well. Thanks for people submitting. I want to dump into the presentation now. I mean, if any times you have questions or thoughts or comments, please drop them in the chat. I can see it while I'm presenting. And so we'll either address it if it's pre-planned in the presentation, address it when it comes to that, or circle around to the questions and comments as it seems best. So drones for humanitarian action. This is from a study that's several years old now, but I think still relevant. The organization looked at whether humanitarians generally were interested in drones, and found that overwhelming yes, and for a variety of different uses, with mapping coming out on top, potentially just because that is one of the things people are more familiar with. Also that it's kind of one of the less risky, easier things to implement, but also used for monitoring, for search and rescue, smaller subset for delivery. So usually smaller, lightweight, high value items, so like medical supplies, vaccines, blood samples, things like that. Also public information coming in there. So PR and communications, and then other, which I'm not entirely sure what falls in that category. We're looking at why drone imagery for maps and how that comes out on top. Drones can provide tremendous temporal and spatial resolution. So very recent and very high detailed imagery. Here's just a comparison of some digital globe satellite imagery to drone imagery. I'm not sure of the date of the satellite imagery, but you can see that there's a lot of changes that have occurred in this imagery since then that would not be apparent if you were relying on that satellite imagery. And also the resolution is much higher. You can pick out much more details. Here's just another example really highlighting kind of the difference in spatial resolution and the details that can be picked out. This is especially important in informal settlements or dense urban areas where houses and structures might be very close together or have kind of roof materials that make it hard to distinguish one from another, like this CGI metal sheeting. Most commercially available satellite imagery these days is around 40 centimeters resolution. Some of the smaller satellites that pass over more frequently are in the meter resolution or more, 520 meters maybe even, which means that so each pixel represents like that amount of distance on the ground. So if something is smaller than that resolution, it's generally not going to show up in the imagery. So if you're looking at 40 centimeter resolution, anything 40 centimeters or smaller in detail is not really going to come out. But drone imagery can be down to like 5 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters, or even less. So definitely can pick out a lot of detail. Just an example of like temporal resolution again, where kind of the satellite imagery here is much older, and you can see when the drone imagery was taken, there's structures that have been completed and new structures. Satellite imagery is subject to atmospheric interference. So in areas of the world, there might be significant cloud cover for much of the year, or parts of the year if there's a monsoon or rainy season. This is a town in the Philippines that quite frequently is covered by clouds, as can be seen in these satellite images. And even when there is kind of that clear day that the satellite captures nice cloud-free imagery, the resolution is not particularly high. It's hard to pick out individual structures in this imagery. But when you get a drone in the air and can capture that imagery, the resolution differences are quite stark. I mean, you can really see the town. This makes a big difference. Looking at the OpenStreetMap data, when people were just tracing from satellite imagery, I think people probably could have filled out the map a bit more, but the volunteers who were tracing in this area were only comfortable really adding just a very few number of the buildings. But with the drone imagery, they were able to map out the village in great detail. Here's kind of a bit denser of an area, the available satellite imagery, and then looking at the drone imagery, the difference is quite stark. Level of detail and the ability to map is much easier to map from that higher level of detail. The OpenStreetMap data prior to the drone imagery being available, and then afterwards the level of detail that can be created from the map. In order to get to a map from the drone imagery, some of you may be familiar with this, but we'll go over the process quickly. You have to take a lot of pictures. You need enough pictures that the features on the ground show up in more than one image, so that the computer program can match those features between the images and then stitch them together like a puzzle. So drones will be pre-programmed with a flight path that they fly automatically. It's too hard for a human operator generally to kind of follow the exact flight path and trigger the camera at the right intervals to get a nice even distribution of pictures and with the right amount of overlap. Additionally, each image will be tagged with a GPS coordinate by the drone. For increased accuracy, people will sometimes use ground control points where they put out and take the coordinates of something that will be visible in the satellite imagery, and then can, using a dedicated GPS station or device, collect a much more accurate coordinate for that particular spot, and then use that to correct or double check the overall accuracy of the imagery once the pictures are stitched together. There's a variety of different softwares available. You might have heard of Pix4D, Drone Deploy, as some of the proprietary commercial options available. We have been very interested in OpenDroneMap, which is a open source photogrammetry software that people can use and install for free. That is competitive, I think, with some of the commercial options. And using these softwares, you can create what they call orthomosaics, so the stitched together images into one giant map, and also some additional products. On the right here is an example of a digital surface model. So using triangulation and the different images, the software can actually estimate the heights and depths of the surface of the area that the drone has imaged. So in this case, being able to pick out kind of that lower swale kind of valley to the bottom left there, and then you can see the houses and the roofs and stuff like that. So this kind of product can be useful when moving beyond mapping and do kind of advanced analyses such as slope analysis to maybe look at the risk of landslide or flooding and things like that. There's also ways to share imagery. So Open Aerial Map is an online platform where people can upload imagery from drones or satellites as well, and then make those layers available to people to load into their browser for editing in OpenStreetMap or other platforms. If you haven't heard of OpenStreetMap, it's a kind of community-built map of the world. American and British Red Cross are both involved in Missing Maps, which is an initiative to get people to contribute to this platform so that the map is detailed and robust before a disaster hits, so that this geospatial data can be used effectively for understanding the impacts of a disaster, and also be used for preparedness and planning as well. So mapping is being done within the Red Cross movement. This is an example. The Belize Red Cross has a drone that they use for mapping. And when it comes to OpenStreetMap, this is actually an old screenshot, but there's a tool called the Tasking Manager, which allows people to kind of coordinate using imagery to then trace squares and keep people from overlapping and conflicting when they're tracing an area. In that initial chart of how people are interested in using drones, monitoring and search and rescue both came up. An example within the movement, the German Red Cross actually has a small team that has quite a nice drone, as you can see here from this image, that they've used both to help firefighters. They have a thermal camera on it that they can watch for like hotspots and where the worst fires are and help direct the people on the ground accordingly. Also, there was an instance where there was an explosion in the field, and they were able to use the drone to go look and see if it was safe, whether it was a potentially old ordnance from one of the world wars, or if it was a sinkhole or some other sort of phenomena. So being able to kind of observe the situation safely before firefighters and other first responders went in to kind of check it out on the ground. Also, when it comes to like PR and communications, very effective. This was an example from Bangladesh where they compiled a website using drone imagery from the air, and also it's interactive. You can click in and then see also the imagery from the ground inside kind of their hospitals in Bangladesh, in the refugee camps there. In all, when we did our research previously, we found that at least 27 national societies, plus the Federation and the ICRC, have all used drones in some way. So that's really great to see. Some of the things that experiences that people have had is positive community response. I think the ICRC working in conflict zones maybe has to be more careful about this. Generally with the Red Cross when they're doing preparedness or response work, and especially when they have reached out to the community beforehand and kind of socialized their activities, people are always excited and interested to see what's going on and to get a glimpse of this technology and to see their community from a new perspective. In terms of community mapping, it's been a great tool. Community leaders and the Red Cross and organizations all are increasingly relying on up-to-date maps to do things like disaster planning, to do community planning and things like that. So having this way to collect up-to-date detailed map imagery has been helpful. Maps in general are awesome. We're seeing them used more as different national societies and teams. The British Red Cross Maps team, the American Red Cross has engaged in SIMS. We have seen Surge Information Management Support Network being joined by more and more national societies, and this capacity being built up by more units. Drone imagery, for some of the reasons we mentioned earlier, is just great. That different perspective, being able to safely get high resolution imagery of your surroundings and using that situational awareness, context awareness for everything from responding to fires and explosions in fields, to building out detailed maps for community preparedness, to disaster assessments. Safety first. So drones do bring in kind of a new element of risk that needs to be carefully adapted for. But there's a lot of opportunity with the global movement of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies to kind of share lessons learned, to share materials, to build a community practice, to make sure that people do engage in drone programs and operations in a safe and effective manner. There are initiatives outside the Red Cross as well that we can engage with. So a number of different organizations, including I think the Federation, helped write the Humanitarian UAV Code of Conduct. If you go to uavcode.org, you can read more about this initiative and the guidelines, but setting out a series of recommendations for individuals or groups that want to operate drones in humanitarian context. A lot of those things that the Red Cross movement already applies based on the 7 fundamental principles and other things, but some nice UAV specific context is well provided. So embracing open. Being humanitarians, our budgets are often limited. And so both in the operation of drones and doing things like using software to process and analyze this imagery, it's helpful when that software can be open source, so we can scale it and share it more easily, not being hindered by things like licensing restrictions. Also open data, so being able to combine efforts and see value add for things like map data beyond an individual project or individual organization. In magnifying people with technology, so awareness that within the Red Cross, Red Crescent, volunteers are one of those. It's like kind of the focus and one of our greatest strengths and the pillar of our work. And so not getting caught up in fancy gadgets, but being able to understand how this technology can help our volunteers and help improve our work, not just replace it. So those are the kind of the key points that I had prepared. And so now I want to, we'll shift back to the word cloud, and also if there's any questions or if people want to suggest topics to dig deeper into, would be great.
Thanks, Dan. It was super interesting. Does anyone have any questions or anything they're curious to hear about?
How do you want us to do questions? In the chat or round?
I guess you can ask it. I don't see anyone else. Oh no, people do have questions.
Do other people first.
I started typing, but this might be an easier thing. Good to see you again, Dan. Thank you for the presentation. This is great. Just reflecting on what you were saying and showing in one of the slides about the number of national societies who have adopted drones in their work, and I'm really glad to see that we have reached the number of 27 or whatever it is. In British Red Cross, we had actually quite a few offers to engage with various companies who were in one way or another involved with drones and associated technologies to explore possibility of using the technology in our international work. Unfortunately, very little traction was gained internally, and I think in part of that it was down to the fact that I guess at the time it required kind of early adoption mindset, which is not necessarily present. I'm just wondering, is this something that you encountered in the American Red Cross and when talking to the colleagues who currently are using it, and how did you bridge that gap? How did you get from, you know, proposing something that is a little bit outlandish, maybe for old school humanitarian workers, to get to where you are now?
So one notice that within the American Red Cross, there's a pretty stark divide between the very small international services department and the domestic work. I think the British Red Cross, like MAPS team, is a little bit more integrated maybe with some of their domestic work. So domestically, we haven't done a whole lot with drones. There's been a few instances where like a chapter has somebody who might do like a small activity, and we did, I think, like a test partnership with a corporation for using drones for assessment post one of the hurricanes, but not a lot of uptake there. Within international services, we've been able to kind of partner with other national societies and integrate this in a few of our larger programs. So doing some work in Haiti with the Haitian Red Cross tied to the tail end of our earthquake recovery programs there. In the Philippines, tied to our Typhoon Haiyan programming, we're able to do some mapping work. And so engaging with other national societies and helping, you know, explore together how to use this in programs. It's easier when there's like a clear link to an existing program. In this case, mapping for better detailed spatial data for preparedness programs and things like that. It is kind of a trade-off when it comes to partnerships and like how you do this. I'm hesitant to kind of partner with American corporations to do work internationally. I've seen kind of horror stories and just like bad practices in terms of corporations from more developed countries taking their technology and almost like experimenting with it in Africa and Southeast Asia and stuff like that. And also when they do that, also not only kind of offloading risk onto other countries and organizations, and also taking advantage of like areas where regulations are less developed, but also harming the development of local capacity. So We Robotics is an organization that has has this thing called Flying Labs, where they kind of develop research groups, incubators, organizations to develop capacity locally. So as much as possible, instead of like partnering with like major corporations in their countries, like I think American Red Cross should work to partner with local drone companies, local drone organizations, if they're going to rely on a partnership to do this in other countries, and not partner with an American company to go fly around the world somewhere else and take that technology on a plane and import it, drop it in. And increasingly, there are very, I think, very valid options within a lot of these countries to find local partners, local groups that can help with these programs.
Does that answer your question, Tarek?
Answers the question, and actually, has gone. Dan has gone into some of the other stuff I was thinking about. But yeah, it's just in general. I think I'll pick Dan's brain separately on the whole concept of solution engineer as a role in the American Red Cross, because I think that might be kind of a position that we might need in a British Red Cross in order to bridge some of these gaps and kind of reluctance to explore new technologies. We definitely have a late adopters syndrome, I would say, and it's pity because we are a national society and a country that has easy access to a lot of new technologies, and quite often people from corporate sector, from startups that work not half a mile away from our headquarters in central London are super keen to explore those connections, but for whatever reason, it's just it's failing to launch, and we finish up in a situation where we wait until we have that critical mass in a wider movement, and you have 30, 40 national societies that have adopted and then are obviously ahead of us in many ways to start thinking about stuff. So yeah, anyway, thanks.
Okay.
I think a lot of it probably is linked to like taking risk and the challenges that come with new technologies and things like that. So I see a lot of questions in the chat.
Yeah,
so I want to take them in whichever order you want. I
so,
have some as well. I'll tap them down.
Okay. David's question about how strict or free are regulations enforced around flying drones in the places you do your international work? Have you had occasions where you're prevented from flying at all? Do you need to do relationship building with an authority before going, or do you just arrive and fly it and get the job done before people notice you're there? So definitely don't just go and hope no one notices. And the level that we've had to do of kind of pre-work has varied. So in the Philippines, there is an established process, and it was several months of submitting paperwork to their aviation authority and submitting mission plans and flight plans for the areas and days that we were planning on flying, and getting approval then also at the provincial and municipal level as well for our activities. In Haiti, on the other hand, despite trying really hard to figure out like if there was somebody who we needed to get approval from, it turned out like there wasn't really anybody in charge at the time of this kind of thing. And so we made sure we had a lot of local socialization and communication with the people in the area and the local authorities, but didn't end up having to go through any sort of federal approval process. I think that has since changed. I think they have implemented some national regulations since then. And then our first attempt at drones was actually for a project in West Africa. And there, a failure to kind of start the regulatory approval process in time meant that we were unable to get it, and so had to cancel the trip during the planning stages, because it was getting the approvals was going to take longer than the life of the remaining life of the project. Does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, that does. Thanks, Dan. That's really helpful.
Great. Jumping back up to Izzy, what's been the best use of a drone you've seen in an emergency response? I think some of the examples like the German Red Cross and other examples where like a fire department has used drones for situational awareness to help people responding to some sort of critical incident, or search and rescue, being able to find like a person lost in the woods or in a ditch or something like that. In terms of in like larger scale disasters, I think we're not really there yet. WFP showed up with a team for flying drones in Mozambique. And I didn't see any like really strong examples of the data being used in the response. It seemed like they spent a lot of time just mapping the city of Beira a couple times over over the course of the month or two that they were there. And then like after the fact, they circulated a questionnaire, asking people about how they use data. And I'm not sure that they got a lot of strong examples. In the Bahamas, I think Tuan can speak more to this, but there was some drone imagery combined with other sources of aerial imagery, maybe some plane collected imagery that was used for some aerial assessment, damage assessment, but not a lot of strong emergency response use on a like larger scale, especially in the mapping realm. I think, but also this is a larger issue with just the use of assessment and data in general. I think within the Red Cross movement, and also the wider humanitarian sphere, we do have trouble with that link between assessment and then actually getting that data into the planning process and having it strongly linked to decisions that are being made. Too often, I think assessment.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say just I don't know if it takes a long time to get drone imagery, so for emergency response, like something immediate, it might be a bit challenging to get things out, a lot of critical data out to get something useful, or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, so like,
sorry.
Go ahead, who was that?
I can see good use around here in Wales where we get quite a few floods. For a quick response, you could sort of launch a sort of small, like a Mavic Mini, just to check out the perimeter of the flood and any houses and any people. I see good use of that there.
Yeah, for smaller areas and smaller scale stuff, or for quick situational awareness, or for just monitoring an ongoing disaster incident like a fire or small flood, can be very useful. For example, just anecdotally, after one of the hurricanes, they were setting up like a base camp area in Florida here in the United States, and didn't realize that they were like right next to a marsh, and so the land was a bit lower than they thought, and also there were a lot more insects and bugs than they thought. And if they'd been able to launch a drone and just do a quick scan around of the surroundings, they would have known that like maybe they should have looked for a different field to set up in, and they would have avoided some of the flooding and bug problems that they had later. And like you said, you know, small flood, you can put one up in the air and check out the road conditions ahead, the bridges, things like that.
Thanks. Does that answer your question? Is it?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Bertrand?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That was great.
Bertrand asks, what kind of drone brand model would you recommend for a humanitarian organization with limited budget? So with the kind of how much they're like consumer focused these days, any of the DJI models are great. They're a big company, makes a good quality drone for not too expensive. Like the Mavic Pro, I think is around, was it like 1,200 USD or 1,000 USD? Plus then some batteries and other things start to rack up the cost. But definitely for like small scale mapping, for a quadcopter that you just want to use for some situational awareness or some communications purposes, several, for a couple of thousand USD, you can have a setup. And definitely, I think like the quads are probably your best bet. For fixed wings, you tend to need larger takeoff and landing areas. The operation is a bit more complex. Yeah. But awareness that like it's not just, so with some of the commercial models especially, they're almost marketed as like a toy, to the extent where it's like, oh, like you don't need to train or practice, you just unbox it and fly and you're good to go, and you can take images and videos of things. I think the ease with which you can set up and get flying kind of hides some of the fact that this is kind of a serious tool, and that it does require an awareness of the limitations of the technology and kind of the risks involved, and how to make sure you're safely operating. You got to fully understand, especially whatever model brand you buy, all the different fail safes and automatic functions. Like if it has a return to home feature, like you need to know exactly what that means. Is it going to, fly at 50 meters directly back to you with the launch point, and like, is there a hill in between that's 50 meters tall between you and where the drone is now, and things like that. So just being whatever brand model, it's important to invest in training and understanding everything about it. Tuong wants to know if there's any drones that are better for certain activities. With a fixed wing, you do get longer flight times and can cover a larger area. So if you're mapping using a fixed wing instead of a quadcopter or one of the copters, means you can cover a larger area. This can be limited by other factors. So if you're like in the US, you can't fly beyond visual line of sight. You need to have the drone within sight of the pilot at all times. So if you might have a fixed wing that can cover, several square kilometers, but legally you're not allowed to fly, several kilometers away, because you're not going to be able to see where the drone is when it's doing that. The copters with more propellers, so your hexacopters, your octocopters can carry larger payloads, but also tend to have reduced flight times or require much larger batteries, which can create complications if you need to transport it on a commercial airline or something like that, because there's limitations on the size of batteries you can fly with on an airline. But if you've seen the drones that hoist like the cinematic cameras and stuff like that, they tend to be the much larger octocopters or something. Any challenges around the use of drones currently, like size of files, expertise, regulations, perceptions, any ways to get around or manage those challenges?
No, it's a very broad question, but you can pick whichever.
Okay. So yeah, definitely challenges in all of that. Imagery files tend to be are larger. So if limited connectivity, and if you need to use the cloud to process your drone imagery, you need to somehow get potentially thousands of image files up to the cloud, and then a large, maybe several gigabyte image potentially back down. Expertise, both in flying a drone safely, in processing imagery, in analyzing imagery, all of that requires some level of technical expertise. Regulations, yes, they can be very clear, but also then limiting potentially. They can also be vague, and also then make it so that the organization doesn't want to fly drones because they can't know if they're going to get in trouble or not, because the regulations aren't in place to let them kind of know how they are allowed to operate. In perceptions, well, generally I think drones are received well. It is important to communicate with the community that's being mapped. Let them opt out if they don't want to be mapped, I think. And in some areas, drones have been used, especially conflict zones, by militant groups to cause harm. And so there are areas where the community might not be accepting or willing to let drones fly with them. In logistics, transporting drones, batteries, there's limitations and restrictions around flying those on airlines, things like that.
You can't take them on the planes?
So like the same as like you can't, certain sized battery packs for your, if like you have a really large backup battery pack for your laptop, you can only take like 1 or 2 or something. Some of the suitcases that have like built-in battery packs, you're supposed to remove them before you check them, things like that. There are limitations around, especially with some of the larger drone batteries, around how many and you can take and how you need to store them and pack them.
I thought there were restrictions around taking the drones themselves, but there isn't.
Also, you're generally not supposed to like fly with the propellers and the drone together in your carry-on. You have to like pack the propellers, because I guess they think that if you somehow set up the drone, it could then be used as a weapon with the spinning propellers, which a spinning propeller definitely can cause some damage if you've ever, yeah, you can cut yourself quite seriously with a drone.
Thanks.
Lots of challenges. What qualifications are applied and are they recognized internationally? So again, there's a patchwork of regulations from country to country, depending about flying, also about like what people need in order to be qualified to fly. In the US, there's different, like a hobbyist can fly a drone without like passing a test or doing anything. They just have to follow certain regulations. But if you're flying for a company or organization, you need to pass a written test that you have to go into a testing center to take. It's not just an online thing. I think the UK probably has might have some sort of regulatory process for qualifying unmanned pilots if you're doing it commercially. Like the Philippines, when we went there, they recognized the US qualification for the permitting for their activities. So some countries might have a list of other country qualifications that they recognize. But it's a patchwork you have to look in. It varies. David asked if do you know of any non-optical sensors being put on small drones for humanitarian work. Yeah, so I think Mica Sense is maybe the name of it. Red. Yeah, so Mica Sense is a company that makes multispectral sensors. So this can be useful for things, if you're doing agricultural work or like environmental work. There's something called an NDVI, a naturalized, or I'm sorry, my letters are getting mixed up, but a vegetation index where you can use the near infrared band to then kind of estimate the health of vegetation. Also, there's a company that makes thermal cameras that are small enough and light enough to go up on drones. It's escaping me right now. And I think actually LiDAR sensors as well. There's a few that I've seen that have been marketed towards being small enough to use in drones. I think a lot of those are still very expensive or kind of limited in their functionality. But especially with, I think, as that technology becomes useful for other things like self-driving vehicles, the cost will probably continue to come down, and also the size of the sensors will continue to decrease. So it would be exciting things to watch in that realm as things go forward. I've lost my chat box. There it is. Ian Clark notes that the DJI Mavic Mini is only 500 pounds, has a 2.5 mile range and a 30-minute flight time. I mean, yeah, that one I think you can like very tiny, you almost like hold it in the palm of your hand. So easy to throw in a backpack or take somewhere. David asked, have you ever tried to build your own drone? He knows the answer and it's yes. I've toyed around with, so there's a whole kind of hobbyist culture that builds foamies. They sell this foam core board that's a thin piece of foam sandwiched between two poster boards. And people have been using that a lot to build kind of RC airplanes. I've also explored looking at how to build drones out of that as well. So here is an example of one that I was attempting to assemble. And also I've explored just using off-the-shelf parts to build like quadcopters from different components so that you can kind of customize what sensor it has on it and more easily kind of repair and troubleshoot it and just learn more about the limitations of the technology. So where did I learn about things like taking batteries on flights? Trial and error, or is there a For Dummies guide to getting started? Are you just smart? I'm not just smart. I spend too much time searching on the internet and reading up on these things. Luckily, we haven't had any major errors. Some amount of trial, but trying to be safe about it and careful about the trials. We did early on purchase 2 different fixed wing models. Ended up not being particularly useful for our needs due to challenges finding good places to land them. And with those, actually, we had kind of one or a couple rough landings as well that were on the error side of things. And in some of my, I didn't include pictures in the presentation, but in some of my attempts at building kind of the foam core airframes, definitely have had a number of crashes in fields as I was trying to build those and fly them. And then for the batteries and flights, etc., I'm working on compiling like a series of checklists and kind of documents with key considerations. And so, yeah, just working on building out kind of those documents to help remember all the different things you need to check on and consider when planning a program or going somewhere. Paul has shared a couple links. Andrew has shared a couple links.
Sounds like David's going to build the British Red Cross a drone, so we can take it.
Okay, great. Have you heard any of any horror stories when doing research in the Red Cross movement? I don't think, nothing like terrible. A number of like, both we've crashed our fixed wing drones on landing, rough landings a couple times. The Belize Red Cross had a incident where the drone came down hard, their quadcopter, and like the camera module broke. PMI, the Indonesia Red Cross, has had a crash or two with their DJI Phantom. But in all these instances, nothing terrible. Actually, when we were in the Philippines, it wasn't just a hard landing. The fixed wing drone at one point crashed in like in a field in which took us, we couldn't find it. And then it was like 3 days later that that one of the people from the town was walking around and brought it in. But that's okay, because we're still. Yeah, nothing of the. That being said, I'm still interested of the horror stories level. Have you heard anything about the affected population being wary of drones in conflict zones? Yes, that's definitely a concern, especially with like the ICRC that does work more in these areas. Like when they have been thinking about using drones, that's been one of their top concerns, I think, or up there in a top concern. And Andrew has shared the link. Yeah.
I'm just aware there's 9 minutes left, so and a lot of people have not asked any questions. Does anyone of the people who have not asked anything have any questions? I'm guessing.
I'm good. Some of I was going to ask something, but other people have covered it, so that's all good for me. Thanks.
Okay. Andrew, did you have any questions?
I have a list. Dan, I'm just going to rattle off a couple of questions and keywords, and you go to the one that you think is the most interesting or useful, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
I'm curious as to what SIMS should be doing next. Like if the movement was to get better at this capability for a next either disaster response or disaster risk reduction kind of thing, what would you suggest? You're probably the person that's done the most research, so that's number one. I'm curious if there's any like volunteer-led drone things that have sustained and scaled. I'm thinking Africa, Kenya, like around the IM hubs. I'm curious as to the processing, like the imagery processing. I know is super heavy. and most of the solutions are built for a first world environment, and often we've got data connectivity challenges. And to what extent is it kind of pragmatic? And I know you've been using Possum, and so just the offline, the other stuff that you need apart from the fancy drone to actually make it useful in the field. If there was a national society to follow, who would that be? So is it, at the moment, it seems like you, which is great. But are there other national societies that you look to that you think are actually leading a far more pragmatic kind of field example way? And is there any overlap with on your foamies, which is great, love it, love it. Is there any overlap with Ivan Gayton? Is he still doing drones? So go to where you think is useful.
Yeah, Ivan, as far as I know, they and his colleagues in Tanzania are still kind of exploring, a more intimate understanding of the technology and using local materials to try and build out expertise and ability to use and fly drones. National Society to follow, I think it's been a while since I've touched base with them, but Kenya Red Cross had a team of people that was like looking more into actually having a drone program and being able to have like SOPs and more sustainable and consistent use of them. SIMS, I think, is excellent as a community of practice. So being a place for national societies to share what they're doing with drones and being that kind of knowledge hub and letting people inspire each other and learn from each other and leverage the work that each other are doing, I think would be kind of a key thing within SIMS. For processing, the technology keeps getting better. It would be great, like we've been able to invest some in supporting the further development of Open Drone Map. So that everybody can benefit from that. Volunteers. So actually, I've recently started recruited some volunteers to help with some different activities and have a volunteer that's working on exploring a VTOL, so vertical takeoff and landing airframe, a quad plane, so a kind of a combination between a quadcopter and a fixed wing plane. So he is kind of researching that and potentially putting together a manual so that others can build it and replicate his experience with that. I'm not aware of like really any. I think actually the German Red Cross team, it's like one of their volunteers who just already had the drone expertise and kind of spearheaded that initiative. I don't think that was actually something that was led at the national headquarters level. So yeah, there are examples of volunteers kind of supporting this and leading this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, the Kenyan Red Cross seems like your national society to follow or support. It's great.
Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions?
This is actually funny because
so I think it's Becca, Helen, Shefna, Neil, and James have not asked anything. Do you guys have any last questions?
There's no questions from me.
Okay.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Cool. Well, thank you, Dan, for this talk. It's super interesting. I have like lots of other questions, but I think I'll hold off on them. And I'll just like chat to you on the on the chat. if people here want to contact you, can they reach you via email, or what's the best way?
Yeah, daniel.joseph@redcross.org. Also, any other of the internet ways, Twitter, Skype, WhatsApp, GitHub issues, at least. There are many ways to reach me.
Cool. I might share your email address then in the takeaways and things like that. Then.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to take the few minutes left to talk about the next sessions coming up. I'm just going to stop your sharing that for a second. And so thank you everyone for joining, and we have some really nice sessions coming up as well. So next week we have, maybe Paul can explain a little bit more about this, missing maps introduction and mapping for climate action. Then we have a session planned on RC2 relief, which is a tool that has been developed by the IFRC to collect information about relief information, but it's now being used quite widely as a data collection tool. And I think people from the Federation are coming to present. We have an empty slot which anyone is welcome to use. Maybe someone can come and present their project. That would be really nice to hear about some of the things happening around. So if anyone has any suggestions of things they want to come and talk about, you can talk about your project or whatever. Maybe we've got Bertrand on the line. Maybe he could come and talk to us about ESSN, which is the Federation's cash program in Turkey, or something like that.
We have Neil on the line, who's my line manager, so I guess he would do a better job at that.
So if you guys are available, that could be quite interesting. And then we've got the Neil Bowman from I4C Shelter Cluster, who's coming to give a talk on information management for interagency coordination mechanisms. And then the next slots are still free, so if anyone else wants to talk about anything else, it's open to anyone. The spreadsheet is on the team, so just go in, put your name down, and we'd love to hear about, everyone wants to hear about all the projects that are happening out there. So don't hesitate, and if you're hesitating, you can contact one of us to ask if you want to present, if you have any doubts or anything like that. Cool, thank you everyone. It's 4 o'clock, and thanks again, Dan, once again for joining us, and have a good weekend.